Scary Story fanatics. Welcome to night 8 of this little tarot go-round as we get knee-deep in the 13 days of Halloween. Set to relive one of my personal favorites. That's what I want in my treat bag this year. Sit back, relax, and get ready for a retelling of Mickey's House of Pain.
The wonderful world of Disney. Let me tell you from experience, there's nothing wonderful about it. But I'm sure I don't need to tell any of you that. I'm sure that most of you are quite acquainted with the dark rumors surrounding the conglomerate's outward, overly enthusiastic and happy exterior. Underneath its shell are dreadful stories and myths regarding abandoned themed sites, the use of real skeletons birthing unspeakable hauntings, and a variety of cover-ups so blatant that the topic itself is merely dusted over with legality. So lightly dusted that it's clear to see whatever accusations have been made are certainly true, but as far as the law is concerned, simply never happened. The happiest place on Earth is in fact the most corrupt place on Earth. A few years ago, much like many of you I'm sure, I paid little heed to these tales and corresponding gossip. Disney, to me, was what it represented when I was a kid. Colorful scenery, delightful characters, enchanting music, and a sense of magic that only Disney seemed capable of delivering. I hadn't been to a Disney-themed park when I was a child, and didn't end up making the trip to one, namely the Epcot Center at Disney World in Orlando, Florida, until I was fresh out of college. I managed to graduate with a 3.8 GPA, which to anyone who knew me in high school would note that as epic, and I was thrilled to have achieved such an accomplishment. But this end result was not without its arduous means. Many long nights and weekends were spent at my work desk at first the dorm and then my first apartment. The journey through college was as grueling as it was rewarding, and now that it was over, Tony had convinced me to undertake one last hurrah before parting ways in order to pursue the rest of our lives. Tony was my roommate all through college. When I first met him on the day I had arrived at the college dorm, I honestly thought he was a douche. His clothes were clearly too large for his build. A thin pencil-lined beard grew along the perimeter of his jaw, and his demeanor came across as apathetic. I remember wondering how this kid could even get into college, before quickly moving on to what life would be like being forced to live with him in a cramped space barely big enough for 2 beds and 2 end tables. Well, apparently, I'm a shit judge of character, because Tony turned out to be one of the coolest people I've ever met. Sure, he'd get himself into trouble from time to time, trying to swipe beer from the local gas station or the like, but he never dragged me into it. So, to me, it was just more like antics than an annoyance or an issue. By the end of our first year, we had become good friends. So much so, in fact, that we decided to go halves on the apartment together nearby the college for the remainder of our degrees. Now that classes were over, our stint as roommates were coming to an end. I honestly can't tell you how the topic of Disney World came up because those details elude me. But I do recall that it was Tony who suggested that we go once I told him that I'd never been. The park was within driving distance, less than half a day drive, and because I didn't go out much, I had acquired a small nest egg of cash that could now be used to reward myself for my diligent academic efforts. Tony lived on impulse, going wherever the wind took him, as the adage goes. So once I agreed, he was already making plans to leave the following weekend. There was no point in arguing a delay. For him to listen, I would need to provide him with a good reason, and I had none. So, the following weekend, bright and early Friday morning, before sunrise, we were on the highway and headed for the Florida state line. Our destination? Walt Disney World. The only word I can find to describe my first impression of the vast array of Disney-themed buildings, walkways, and characters is spectacular. I found myself in a literal stupor whenever we graced a new area of the park. Those of you that have been there, I'm sure know exactly what I'm talking about. I had been to amusement parks before, like Six Flags and Hershey, but Disney World is less of an amusement park and more of an experience. We had walked so much the first day, my feet couldn't wait to finally get some rest in the hotel room. As exhausted as we were, the excitement kept the two of us up talking for another few hours before sleep would find me. And it felt as though no sooner did the day break on my face that we were up and out the door, ready for another day of thrills and excitement. We spent a good portion of the morning just walking around and taking in the sights, honestly, which turned into ride after ride at Thunder Mountain. It wasn't long after that I complained of hunger, and Tony eagerly agreed. Stomachs growling, the two of us headed for the nearest food stand. If you've been to Disney World, you know that there's food carts everywhere, and aching with hunger, the two of us found the first food stand and stood in line. Now, we had been walking all day, and still sore from the previous day. I hopefully anticipated having a seat and taking a break. So, when we got almost up to the front of the line, and the both of us realized that neither of us had enough money in our wallets to cover the price of something to eat and drink, we both groaned in frustration, left with only one option: walk back to the hotel and get more money from the luggage. I deliberated my irritation towards this thought to Tony. I was going to turn and start what seemed to be an arduous walk, but I paused, noting a hesitation in Tony's expression, like he was running a thought through his mind, a notion that was affirmed when he told me to sit tight on a nearby bench and that he had an idea. Before getting out of line, Tony told me to talk to the merchant from the side of the line while he swiped a soda from the countertop and rendezvoused with me where I would be standing at the bench. I would be acting as the distraction so that the guy would be looking at me instead of Tony and his sticky fingers. Yeah, I knew that this was a bad idea, but I was so goddamn thirsty, and I really didn't want to go on any more long walks for a while. Besides, it was Tony that was going to be doing the stealing, right? And it was just a fucking soda after all. These facts and more were tossed about my cognition, trying to reinforce a decision for doing what Tony asked. Long story short, we got caught. The guy turned and caught Tony red-handed, and having seen the two of us standing together, lumped me in with the act once security arrived. The guys were nice enough not to cuff us in front of the passing families and their small children, but the seriousness on the guy's face whenever he looked at me or Tony let me know that we were in big trouble. The two of us were walking with a small crowd of 3 security guards before I even knew where we were being taken. There are no Miranda rights at Disney World, no one phone call, and rarely do they use cuffs, from what I was told by the gentleman across from the cherrywood desk at which Tony and I sat side by side. But there was, as maybe some of you know, a jail. Yup, that's right. Disney jail is real. The whole thing is basically a single hallway of moderate length in a structure below the park, frequently referred to as the utilidors, with cage-like cells lining the length of both sides. Surprisingly, the entirety of it is decorated in the typical Disney-themed styles, and unsurprisingly, each and every cell was vacant, with the exception of the one now occupied by me and my friend. Once the guard left us to ourselves, supposedly awaiting the arrival of the Orlando police, the two of us argued back and forth regarding the logistics of how we ended up in this mess. This lasted a while, but in a small cell, even decorated as it was, an occupation of time was quickly resolved to bleak boredom. I had been leaning against the wall with my eyes closed, so I didn't notice what Tony had been up to until I heard the faint clicking of metal upon metal nearby the proximal cell door. My slowly opening eyes shot wide open when I saw Tony stooped by the cell door. I knew what he was doing before I even knew how. He was attempting to pick the fucking lock. "Are you out of your mind?" I asked him. Tony responded without turning to face me, his focus intently targeted on what he was doing. "I'm not waiting here anymore in this flashlight cop jail. It was just a fucking soda, man. What are they gonna do? Send us to prison? The most they'll probably get out of it is having us tossed from the park, and the way I see it, they want us gone. Fine. If I could just get this door open, let's just bolt," Tony insisted. "How the hell are you picking that lock anyway? What did you do? Smuggle a lockpick?" I said in a half-joking manner. Tony didn't respond, only continued his work while I tried to stop his efforts with debate. Only when I heard the lock pop and the gate swing open did I see what he had accomplished this with. The jail here isn't much of a jail, like I said, so the guards didn't really frisk us or remove objects normal jails wouldn't allow one to have. I imagine the locks are cheaper than a real jail's as well, because I don't think the large, broken-off tooth from a belt buckle would work on just any standard jail cell lock. But with the door wide open, there was no point in arguing anymore. I was all in now, and resolved myself to quietly following Tony out through the now open doorway. My heart was racing with adrenaline and fear. I knew that if we got caught now, that we'd be in even bigger trouble. And honestly, the cheerful decor and playful music coming through the PA system didn't help alleviate much stress. In fact, it somehow compounded it. Thick, palpable, bitter fear, smothering and pressing down on my chest with the weight of sinister happiness that, when perceived in such a context, came across as demented and evil. I must have been pretty nerved up, because when the large hand gripped my right shoulder from behind, my body jolted as I shrieked like a 6-year-old girl. Tony turned at the sound and saw the man behind me, seeming to swallow something hard before uttering out one word, telling me all I needed to know about what was going on. Shit. I knew this would fucking happen, and I was so pissed at him for not listening to me. We had been caught. Again. I knew we were in some hot water now, but I had no inkling of despair or terror that would soon follow. If I did, I would have rather died fighting the guards for my life and freedom right there on the spot than enduring what was going to happen. Even now, it's hard to think about it, and I know it won't ever get any easier. And I'll never, ever look at anything Disney the same again. Tony and I remained silent. I, more or less, just trying to make myself as invisible as I could to my imprisoners. Tony, probably due to the same reason, added with the avoidance of getting an earful or a fistful from me. The guards were much quieter now, their faces stern. There were two of them this time. One, the man from before, who had sat with us at his desk, and another, slightly older gentleman who I had not seen before. I thought I heard the younger guard mumble something to himself like, "You boys have really done it now." But I honestly can't be sure. The clacking of footsteps and music were the only sounds to greet our ears, and I'm not sure when it happened, but the utilidors we had been walking through had lost their iconic Disney themes at some point. The walls had now become a typical mundane gray and white, lined with machinery, blinking lights, fluorescently painted pipes, and other such things you might see in the sublevel of a more normative business establishment. But as we walked, I also noted the lighting was slowly diminishing. It wasn't terribly noticeable, and I really couldn't tell you if the lights were gradually becoming dimmer or if there was just less of them. But regardless, the ever-waning glow of illumination sparked a twinge of something inside me that I can only describe as hopelessness. The guards weren't saying anything about what they were going to do with us, but Tony and I both knew that it couldn't be good. I'll spare you the mundane details of walking random hallways of decreasing light and silent voices, but the next thing to note was the object I determined to be ominously dreadful. How scared can a human be of a door? Pretty scared, I can tell you that. I read a lot of stories that highlight the fear a window can bring on a dark night, but a window is transparent, allowing you to see the monster on the other side. True horror is in the unknown, and when we rounded the corner leading to a dead-end hallway with a single door at the other side, I knew that if there was anything to fear, it would be on the other side of that door. We were being led without explanation towards this door, and there could only be one intent: to get us on the other side of it. It was metal, iron or steel, and boasted no label or marker aside from a Mickey Mouse head silhouette. There are Mickey Mouse brands hidden all over every Disney park, but something about this one was very different than the rest. In the bottom center of the large black middle circle, there was a single curved line painted from side to side in white, in a curvature obviously meant to represent a frown. This was supposed to be the happiest place on earth, and this contrasting symbol of sorrow and despair wrenched at my gut in an almost painful way. The guard reached out, grabbed the handle, and pulled open the door. The room beyond was dark as oil. I had noted the harder demeanor of the guards this time, but when they simply shoved both I and Tony inside before slamming the door behind us, I found myself stunned, confused, and filled with the most stifling sense of panic. I'm sure we were only in there for a matter of 30 or 40 minutes, but it certainly felt like hours. I think Tony and I must have blindly scanned every inch of the walls and floors with our hands 10 times over. We could feel the door through which we had entered, and another one directly opposite the room from it, but no matter how many times disbelief overtook us and we checked them again and again, we couldn't find a door handle. We were utterly trapped. I'm a big boy. I don't scare too easily, and didn't even back then. But to tell you the truth, it took everything I had not to break down into tears. They could just leave us in here. What if someone forgot we were down here? The thoughts that fluttered within my mind fueled a fear in me I had never known, and at that moment, I was sure that true, pure fear could be no more intense than this. A moment later, I was proven wrong. A large, bright overhead light flickered on with a corresponding hum of electricity. The details of the room sprang into life, and my heart sank further into depths I didn't even know could exist within a man's soul. The walls were plain, stark, gray cement, along with the floor and ceiling. The two doors and the light were the only things inside, besides Tony and I, and the door opposite from the one we had come through had words scrawled across it in black paint applied with a playful, cartoony style font, centered above another frowning Mickey silhouette, spelling out the title, Mickey's House of Pain. I began to back away from the door, as if the object would come to life and pounce at any moment, only halting when abruptly colliding with the wall behind me. Tony turned to look at me. He said nothing, but his expression spoke volumes. Phrases like, "What the fuck?" and "I'm sorry." I didn't know what to do, frozen in place, still trying to resolve myself to one reaction or another. And that's when the door to Mickey's House of Pain burst open, slamming into the adjoining wall. Tony turned back towards the door just in time to see a group of large men enter through the doorway like a parade of clowns stepping out of a small car, one by one. Each was wearing a cheap plastic face mask of differing Disney characters. The guy wearing a Goofy mask rushed Tony. Tony took a few steps back and swung hard. The punch managed to hit its mark, but the guy was completely unfazed and continued his assault unobstructed. I watched Tony try his best to fight them off, but Goofy was joined by a Donald Duck wearing mask assailant, and then two others. I got no more than a shaky look as I was tackled to the floor by two human beings with bulging arms and foul breath, one wearing a Pluto mask, the other adorning Minnie Mouse. I'll never forget the look of those eyes. Those human eyes, set deep within the darkened eye sockets of those smiling masks. These weren't monsters. These were people, and the menace in those eyes told me that, if that were true, it would be the loosest sense of the word. We had been dragged off through the door, each arm held by a burly cartoon mask-wearing brute. I had failed to notice the music until we were inside. It had gotten loud. The melodic tunes, such as "It's a Small World" and "Wish Upon a Star," played so loudly that I could neither hear Tony's frantic words that he shouted at me, nor the chatter that was taking place between the masked assailants that had us ensnared. There was something else mixed in with this jumble of noises as well, but I had yet to make out what it was. It was kind of like a humming and a yelling, all at once, over and over. But beyond that, left me bewildered, for now. Suddenly, the men carrying Tony by his arms stopped. The ones carrying me did not. "Tony!" I yelled, now fighting harder than ever to get free. It was no use. The last I ever saw of my friend was two men pushing him inside an open door along this dark hallway, lined with what appeared to be many more doors, almost all of them closed. I watched the men toss him inside with ease and slam it tightly behind him. I could hear Tony's faint screams and the shaking door as I was being dragged away. The two men at Tony's door just stood motionless, unmoving, just watching me through those masks, as if reveling in my hopelessness and grief. I returned my attention forward, fearfully anticipating the sight of my own fate. And that's when I finally realized it. Some of the doors to the sides were rattling, like Tony's now was. Faint yelling coming from behind some of them. There was people in all of them. But why? For what? What did they want with us? I received no answers, and even after I was tossed into my own small room with nothing but a bare steel door and a food slot and cement walls for decor, I was still left questioning. I assumed I would burst into tears at any moment, that I would freak out now that I was left alone. But I think I was suffering the effects of shock at the time, deadening my emotional responses. That changed when the music stopped. I mean, abruptly stopped, and the humming and yelling came into a horrible, dreadful clarity. It was the sound of pain. Hundreds, maybe thousands of voices, some nearer than others, all of them sobbing or screaming, some begging for release, a few of them begging to die. The sound leaked through small vents in the cement, high on the walls on the left and right sides, and from underneath a small crack at the bottom of the door. I heard machinery and coinciding shouts of agony. I heard the sounds of flesh being ripped, women crying for their children, and the sounds of children begging for their parents. It was so hard to discern what these noises were, because a lot of them grouped together to form a kind of symphony of suffering that was more than the sum of its parts, like the way a herd of camels would sound if they were on fire. I was sick. I threw up in the corner, and I really couldn't tell you how long I spent in there, as for a while, I think I lost my mind. The next thing I remember, I'm sitting back at the guard's desk where Tony and I had been brought the first time. As if waking from a dream, I looked around, completely unsure and confused as to how I had gotten there. The man behind the desk was in fact a Disney guard, but not one that we had spoken to earlier. His face was new. I asked him how I got there, and he explained that I had been caught stealing. He then turned his attention to something behind me, and when I turned to take a look for myself, I saw he was looking at 2 Orlando police officers. I saw one cop give the guard a strange look, but the man just shrugged and said, "I don't know, maybe he's on drugs," referring to me and my question. I demanded to know where Tony was, and the guard looked at me like I told him the president was an elephant. He explained to me and the officers that he had no idea what I was talking about. "Liar!" I yelled. The man jumped back in surprise. The cops held me in place and told me to calm down, and I did the opposite. Suffice it to say, I was charged with more than just stealing, after a court ordered a psychological evaluation facilitated by both my outbursts and my story, and being deemed sane. I stood trial for theft and assaulting an Orlando police officer. Considering the charges, I got off light with only 1 year served. The thing is, Tony was never found, and Disney has never acknowledged his existence. Granted, for a while, I had no idea what to think, and the internet was simply not available where I had been committed to serve my sentence. But since I've been released, I've been doing a whole lot of research about Disney and its darker side. If you dig but just a little, all kinds of shit about Disney starts to float to the surface. The use of real skeletons and abandoned themed parks, to name a couple, but among these are others. Did you know that suicide is so prevalent at all Disney locations that it could almost be labeled as some kind of tourist epidemic? At Disney Hotel in Disneyland, a man leapt to his death from the 14th floor in 1994. In 1996, A similar event occurred when a dentist did the same, followed by another from the 9th floor that same year. At Disney Paris in 2013, an employee doused himself in gasoline and attempted to set himself on fire before being stopped by security. But the strangest of all also occurred at Disney Paris in 2010, when a worker took his own life by jumping out the window of the top floor of the Disney Paris Sleeping Beauty Castle. Upon inspection of the man's work area, investigators found a disturbing suicide note of sorts written on the wall. It read, "I don't want to go back to Mickey's house." They claimed not to know what he could have meant, but I have an idea. Tony was never found, and despite my efforts, has been presumed only missing. Even his parents don't believe me, quick to write off what I have to say as crazy talk and resigning themselves to believing that he simply ran off to live his life. I honestly think they just don't want to accept that their son met with some kind of bitter end without some kind of tangible evidence on which to staple the notion. Can't say as I blame them. A few years ago, I wouldn't have believed me either. And of course, Disney has admitted nothing. Unsurprisingly, they haven't been implicated for anything, and I'm sure they pay people to make sure they never will. Whatever that place is for, Mickey's House of Pain, I don't know. Whether Disney is covering up a human trafficking activity or simply murdering and disposing of unruly park-goers, I can't say for sure. But I will say this. There are a staggering number of people that go missing from Disney-themed resorts every year. Children and adults alike. Don't believe me? Look it up. In fact, look any of this up. You'll find it's all very terribly true. I want to go back. I want to go back and find out more about what happened and why. But I've since been legally banned from visiting any Disney-themed resort. Still, the thought of trying never eludes me. Not completely. It's one of the things that keeps me awake at night, knowing that maybe, just maybe, Tony is still alive, somewhere, deep in the depths of the most hidden of utilidors, undergoing the most sinister forms of torture, or worse. The other thing that keeps me up at night is the Disney-themed music that I can sometimes hear on the most silent of nights, off in the distance, beyond my window in the dark. Thing is, each time I hear it, it's louder, or maybe closer. And I know that wherever it's coming from, whoever it's coming from, that they want me back. To take me back to Mickey's House of Pain.
Well, we might go knocking on some doors this year looking for treats to fill our bags. That might be one we all might want to pass over. But don't pass me over tomorrow, as night 9 rolls around on this little terror go round.
Social media can be very unpredictable, especially regarding horror content. If this content gets removed, all new content will be simultaneously presented on various websites provided in the description to this video. Make sure to follow me in other digital spaces so that you never miss out on the terror. Also, if you like this video, make sure to leave a comment and hit the like button. It helps the channel a lot. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy what's here, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. Writing is a dream of mine. And it's all of you that make that dream come true.